In 1944, somewhere over the South Pacific, Lieutenant Marlowe parachuted onto an island after his plane crashed. Another soldier, Guinpei, lands after a moment. Marlowe pulls a gun on Guinpei, but the shot is missed. After that, Guinpei pulls a revolver and moves to pursue Marlowe. They dash into the jungle and clash as they approach a precipice. With his sword, Guinpei almost cuts Marlowe, but Marlowe yanks it away. Then, Guinpei gets Marlowe on the ground and is about to kill him when a massive ape hand materializes. Then, the two men witness the giant ape ascend above them. Government employee Randa and geologist Brooks travel to Washington, D.C. in 1973 to meet with Senator Willis in order to secure funds for an expedition to Skull Island, a recently found location. Randa cajoles Willis, who isn't too thrilled with the plan, into giving in. Before departing, Randa informs Willis that he would also like a military escort. On their final day before they can ultimately return home, the Sky Devils squadron gets together. They are led by Colonel Packard, and comprise Packard's right-hand men, Chapman, Slivko, and some others. When Packard gets the call to join the expedition, he accepts it with pleasure. When Randa and Brooks travel to a bar, they recruit Conrad, a former British Special Air Service commander, to be their tracker. Two bargoers attack Conrad, accusing him of cheating in a game of pool, but he quickly subdues them. Impressed at first sight, Randa tells Brooks they found their mentor. Conrad sits down with Brooks and Randa to hear their strategy. Upon hearing their offer, he demands extra money, pointing out that there's a good probability they'll be killed on their journey due to predatory wildlife or bad weather. Photographer Weaver, an anti-war activist, is developing some of her own images from the Vietnam War inside a darkroom. When she receives a call to join the expedition, she travels to the base to meet with Packard and his troops, as well as a group of scientists from the business Landsat, which includes San Lin, Brooks' fellow geologist. Weaver feels uneasy about the expedition and believes the military is up to nefarious schemes. Brooks discusses the mission and the objectives for Skull Island. Before boarding choppers to reach the island, the team sails out into the ocean. They manage to locate a high-pressure pocket that they think will be a safer path, but they still have to travel through clouds that create hurricane-like conditions. The helicopters traverse the region after a tumultuous flight through the storm. Weaver snaps a few photos in the air, while the soldiers start dropping seismic charges into the ground, causing explosions. A tree is launched through one of the choppers almost instantly, sending it tumbling to the ground. Kong then appears to the team, looming over them. He tosses another tree through a helicopter, before grabbing several more choppers and slamming them into the ground. Once they reach the ground, the remaining members of the team split apart. While the remnants of the choppers are engulfed in flames, Packard looks up at Kong, who returns the glance. At gunpoint, Packard approaches Randa and asks what exactly brought them there. Randa acknowledges that he has been aware of monsters, such as Kong, for some time, and that he is looking for evidence to support his organization, Monarch. Since Chapman has enough ammo that Packard plans to use against Kong, Packard and other soldiers go in search of Chapman, while Conrad is grouped with the remaining civilians. One of the troops stops abruptly as they pass through a bamboo jungle, because a bamboo tree has stabbed him through the lips. A massive spider that is above them begins to attack them. As Mills being dragged up by the webbing, the other soldiers begin chopping off its legs. Mills slashes himself free, and Packard kills the spider with a gunshot. By a river, Chapman is by himself. He witnesses Kong crossing the river to get medical attention for a gunshot wound he received from the choppers. Kong discovers a massive octopus after taking a drink from the river. He tangles with it and squelches its tentacles before he begins to consume it. The octopus carcass is then dragged off by him. Conrad's group is cornered by a tribe of natives. As they attempt self-defense, an older Marlowe, from the beginning of the movie, appears from the crowd. He invites the gang past the wall, after reassuring them both that they won't hurt one another. Marlowe tells the group that he has lived there for the past 28 years and has accumulated a wealth of knowledge about both the island and its inhabitants. They see Kong as a deity, since he has saved them, as well as Kong's own family, from the subterranean monsters that have been eradicating the local population for ages. They are called skull crawlers by Marlowe. They remained underneath until they were startled awake by the seismic charge blasts. The skull crawlers are going to rule the island if something happens to Kong. Furthermore, he implies that there is a much larger skull crawler out there, and that the ones that have surfaced are only juveniles. Chapman wanders through the forest still alone, and takes a seat on a log. It turns out that the log is a gigantic bug. When Chapman fires at it, the beast does not strike back. As the beast flees, a skull crawler kills Chapman. In order to perhaps be rescued, Conrad informs Marlowe that they hope to arrive at their rendezvous location on the island's north side in 3 days. Marlowe agrees to show them the path, because he believes they cannot complete the task in 3 days on foot. He waves the locals off, and boards a boat with the crew. Shortly after, Nieves is taken away by predatory birds, and is ripped apart in midair. While traveling, Weaver encounters a massive water buffalo, stranded beneath a downed helicopter. When she tries to raise it to release the buffalo, Kong appears and removes the helicopter. After giving Weaver a brief downward glance, he turns away. She seems more in awe of him than afraid. The Forbidden Zone, a historic battlefield between Kong's ancestors and the Skull Crawlers, is where Marlowe leads the troop. Kong's family's massive remains are scattered across the area. When a Skull Crawler shows up, the group is forced to hide. Conrad witnesses the Skull Crawler spewing out Chapman's dog tags and skull after that. Packard and his men pass by in the same neighborhood. A Skull Crawler snatches Randa, as he is snapping pictures, and devours him. A second beast appears, begins to assault, and uses its tongue to draw victims in. The gangs continue to fight off waves of the carnivorous birds, in addition to the Skull Crawlers. Using the sword that belonged to Guinpei, Marlowe slices through a number of the birds, before passing it on to Conrad. To kill one beast, Weaver throws a lighter into a hole that releases gases, which catch fire when ignited, and kills the beast. The fight ends, and they reorganize. Packard is determined to find Chapman, no matter what. Conrad confirms Chapman's death to Packard by displaying his dog tags. Despite Marlowe, Conrad, and Weaver's concerns, Packard is determined to exact retribution for the deaths of his men, thus he still wants to locate Chapman's ammunition cache, so they can kill Kong. Packard gathers explosives, and sets up a trap for Kong that evening. Conrad and Weaver come across the beast in the interim, but Weaver approaches him warily. He is kind when she puts her hand on his face. However, after luring Kong in his direction, Packard lights the fuel near the water, singeing and scorching Kong's fur. Kong stomps on Steve, and murders another man amid the mayhem, before he collapses. Packard then prepares to detonate some bombs, but Weaver and Conrad intervene to prevent him. They persuade the other soldiers that in order to keep the Skull Crawlers out, they must have Kong. As Packard continues to be belligerent, the troops turn on him. At that moment, the largest Skull Crawler erupts from the earth, compelling the gang to flee. Although Packard stays behind to set off the explosives, Kong subdues him with a fist. The main Skull Crawler then starts pursuing the survivors, as they make their way toward the coast. Cole stays behind as a sacrifice, to use the explosive devices he has fastened to his body. Cole explodes up anyway, despite the monster tail whipping him into a wall. The Skull Crawler advances on the group, but Kong comes back, and collides with the creature. Using the propeller of a ship that is connected to a length of anchor chain, Kong eventually slashes the beast in the throat. The beast returns with a renewed attack. Weaver pulls out a flare gun, and aims it at the Skull Crawler's face. Weaver is unintentionally thrown into the river, as Kong snatches the Skull Crawler, and tosses him against the wall. Weaver is removed by Kong, who continues to battle the Skull Crawler. He takes out the monster's guts, by jamming his hand into its mouth. Kong then sets Weaver down beside Conrad, and walks away. Conrad and remaining 7 pals are among the survivors, who leave aboard the boat shortly after, and 3 choppers arrive to retrieve them. Kong watches from a distance, to ensure that his domain is protected. He pounds his fist, and lets out a roar. When the credits roll, we see video of Marlowe, at last making his way back to Chicago, where he finally gets to meet his adult son, and see his wife again. After that, he grabs a drink and a hot dog, and settles down to watch a Cubs game. Following the credits, Monarch is holding Conrad and Weaver captive in an interrogation chamber. Brooks and Lynn enter the chamber, and inform the two that this world was not always home to humans, and that Kong was not the only monster in the world. Brooks opens a folder, and takes out a map of Tokyo, then switches on a slideshow. The slides depict a different team, discovering paintings of additional monsters in caves, including Mothra, King Ghidorah, Rodan, and Godzilla. The last sound we hear are the combined roars of Godzilla and Kong.